Hi, welcome to a new episode in the Internet Surfer, hosting the most horror and creepiest stories from Reddit. Please don't forget to comment, like, share, and subscribe. Enjoy.
Reddit. What is your most disturbing, scary, or creepy real story? Serious, episode 14. Earlier this year, me and my friends went exploring in the woods in my neighborhood. We eventually ran into a tiny, abandoned house with a small pond in front of it. Naturally, we go inside. Of course, all the windows and doors were smashed in, so there was no problem getting inside. We look around the first floor, and we just see some broken glass and nothing out of the ordinary. It only gets weird as we head to the second floor. I'm a little coward, so I was freaked out and was at the end of our line walking up the stairs. As my first friend makes it to the top of the stairs, a strong, cool gust of wind blows on all of us, and my friend sprints down the stairs, dodging us. We all follow him, and we meet outside the house. He was shaking and said he saw clear people. We all make fun of him, except me because I'm a pussy, and they go back inside except him. One of my other friends stays outside with him. We make it upstairs, and I see what I will never forget for the rest of my life. There were no clear people, but there were dead-skinned squirrels everywhere. Not only that, but there was like devil-worshipping pentagram stuff drawn everywhere. I have never run so fast in my entire life. We sat outside in silence. We look back, and the first friend, and he's sprinting through the woods. We look back at the house. There in the window was the skinniest man I've seen in my life, staring right at me. We all get home and tell my parents, and of course they don't believe us. We have been back there a few more times, but we have never been close again. I've had nightmares about it for a while now. Oh yeah, and to describe the layout, we looked around outside before we went inside the house. There was a shed in the back where we found books, weird tubes with giant cans that went into the ground. I'm convinced there's bodies in there, and a tiny metal fence that made a square shape about 5 yards across with barbed wire facing inward. So, the moral of the story is not explored in the woods with friends.
Now I am a 21-year-old girl, and like most 21-year-old girls on Reddit, I have tried a betting of online dating. So, by this point I had dated a bet, had hooked up, met for coffee, had relationships, and had never really had anything bad happen, so I was getting lax with a caution. On this particular night, I was on a date, which was boring, so on the way home I'm chatting with another guy online, and I mention my disappointing date, and he suggests going out with him. All impulsively. We meet and go for a drive around the city. I was still fairly new. So, I agree of course, thinking nothing of it. I met him at a pub near my house, and although he is not quite what I expected, he seems fine enough, albeit a little bogan. So, we were just in his car, which is a mess, but okay, he is young, and we started driving away from my house, and then away from the city. I ask why, and he says he needs gas, and he can get it cheaper further out. So he is a cheapo that is lame, but not bad. I wasn't rich either, only then he keeps driving out of the city. He gets past the end of the tram line, then past the end of the train line. It is roughly 1:30 a.m., and I have 17% on my phone, and we are maybe an hour and a half out of the city. He then chooses this to be the perfect time to tell me that he isn't actually allowed to drive because of the DUI, and how he barely ever drives when he isn't on something, and how if the police officers pull us over he will likely be taken into custody for avoiding the courts for 2+ years. He even has all the documentation to prove such in the car, which he shows me. Classy guy. Of course. I want to leave now, and he says, "We're almost there." He then drives off the main highway and up a hill. As we go up, it starts getting foggy, like can't see more than 3 feet in front of the car foggy. I told him I want to go home now. He then says okay and stops the car. Apparently, it is time for his revive recovery break. I tell him he has 10 minutes before I call the police officers, though I have already texted my friend about what is happening and his contact details, and to his word, 10 minutes later he drives me home with no issues. But I can tell you, I have never been so close to being scared of myself, and if I'm ever getting in a stranger's car again.
I have always been skeptical of the paranormal, but these two events made me a believer. So, the first incident happened when I was 14, and my bedroom was on the second floor of our house. My dad often slept downstairs on the couch because their bed was a heated waterbed, and he got too hot. The layout of our house is important in this story. If I walked out of my bedroom door upstairs, I would be looking straight into my parents' bedroom. To my right would be the stairs to go down to the ground floor. At the bottom of the stairs, you were in the living room, and if you turned left, you would walk through the dining room and either go straight into the kitchen or go left, and you would be in the little hallway leading to the bathroom. Well, we always left a small light downstairs for anyone who got up to use the restroom. I woke up at about 3 a.m. and had to pee, so I got out of bed and started walking down the stairs. When I got down to the bottom of the steps and went to make a right towards the bathroom, I noticed a reflection in the glass front door, which is directly across from the bathroom. So the reflection I saw was my dad walking out of the bathroom. He is a very groggy, grumpy person when he wakes up, and the hallway is small. I didn't want to try to pass him in the bathroom hall, so I sat down on the bottom step and figured I'd just wait for him to get back to the couch. I was groggy, and it took me a second to realize that he hadn't walked in front of me to the couch yet. At that very moment, I heard a snore. My dad was fast asleep on the couch the whole time. I said no for the back up those stairs and locked myself in my room. I wasn't willing to risk my life to go pee. I told my parents the next day, but they just said I let my imagination get the best of me. I heard some weird noises and other stuff over the next few weeks, but I just brushed it off. Fast forward a couple of months, and I'm now 15 and sitting at the family computer in the living room. It was about 8 p.m., and my dad was working late, so it was just my mom and me. She was upstairs cleaning, and I was listening to music on YouTube and doing whatever on the computer. I had over-the-ear headphones and didn't like being unaware of my surroundings, so I kept one of the headphones turned outward so I had one working ear. The lights in our living room are on the ceiling and very bright, so if someone stood behind you while you were at the computer, it would cast a shadow over the screen. My mom would frequently stand behind me and look over my shoulder at what I was doing just to irritate me. So, I faintly hear the vacuum shut off, and a second later, I hear the familiar sound of jean cuffs brushing on the carpet as someone walks up behind me and casts a shadow over the screen. I pull off my headphones and turn around to ask my mom what she wants. Only no one is there. I yell, and she responds from upstairs. I run up there as fast as possible. She told me that she didn't turn off the vacuum. The new belt just snapped in half, and the whole thing started smoking at the very same second someone was behind me. Creepiest moment of my life.
This happened to a female friend of mine a while back. She was driving in a car at night on a lonely road up the countryside when all of a sudden there was a fallen over tree on the road. She got out of the car to check if she could get around it in some way. After she realized she had to turn around, she got back in her car and took another route home. Creeps. After a while, she saw that a motorbike was following her, lighting the heads-up lights at her. Already uncomfortable with the situation, she drove home as quickly as possible and ran into the house, calling her dad for help. Her dad came out and confronted the motorbike driver, who got off his bike and had followed her all the way up her doorstep. The motorbike driver was out of breath and telling her dad that he had seen somebody climbing in the back seat of her car while she was checking out the tree on the road. The back door of the car, standing abandoned in the middle of the road around the corner, was open. Nothing happened after that, except for a warm thanks to the motorbike driver, who couldn't believe what he'd seen, and, of course, an uncomfortable, chilly feeling for everyone involved.
In high school, I used to hang out with my friend John almost every day. When we first began hanging out at this house, I would sometimes hear disembodied footsteps, but very often I would see what looked like the shadow of a person out of the corner of my eye, only to have it disappear moments later. After a month or so, I finally mentioned this to my friend, and he got mad. He demanded to know who had told me he saw shadow people and begged me not to joke around with him about it. I assured him I was serious. Soon, we would hear laughter when no one else was home, doors would close by themselves, and the TV would turn itself on and off. One day, after these experiences had grown more intense and more frequent, I mentioned to my friend blessing the house. Right as I said this, a box sitting on a nearby counter flew off the counter at me. It sounds unbelievable, but it was the single most terrifying experience of my life. My friend and I got holy water and sprinkled it around the house while saying a prayer and never experienced anything in the house again. Months later, my friend came to stay at my lake house with me for a weekend. At one point in the night, we both thought we saw a shadow person, but decided to pass it off as nothing. Later that night, We woke up to what sounded like voices coming from the living room. He went to investigate, thinking someone might have broken in, and I stayed put. A few moments later, I heard the sound of someone thundering down the hallway and ran out to see why my friend was running, but he wasn't in the house. My friend was outside on the porch and came inside saying that he had heard a loud noise from the house, too, and thought it had been me. Nothing else happened for the rest of the weekend, but the next time I went to the house, after it had sat empty for a week, a picture frame with my photo and it had been ripped off the wall and thrown down the hall, and the pillows from my couch were stacked one on top of the other, in the very middle of the couch. I've since stopped hanging out with John, and I've never experienced anything of this sort again. Let me start by saying that this took place in the house that I now live across from, and my computer setup is in front of the window now, and I can see the house noticeably clearly. Okay, so when I was about 13, I often went over to my best friend's house who lived directly across from me. It didn't really matter what time of day or night it was, and the nice thing about it was his stepmom and dad are excellent friends with my dad, so I would just walk over to his house every day and play GameCube and whatnot with him till I decided to go home. Sometimes I would just spend the night. Well, one night around 2 a.m., I walked out of my front door, and outside my house is a dirt field mostly full of weeds. Well, I'm walking over, and all of a sudden I get a chill, and I get goosebumps. I really didn't think much of it. Well, after about 20 steps or so, I look to the field, and I see a silhouette of a person, and it seemed that this person was leaning along my neighbor's fence. I get really nervous, and I begin to panic, acting like I don't see him. Well, after about another 10 feet, I look over once again, and the silhouette is now glowing bright white. And I don't know what happened, but it drew me closer to it so much so that I changed the way I was walking and started to head towards it. After walking about 15 feet, I hear a really deep, terrifying laugh, and the silhouette changes shapes, and I swear on my life, I came out of this trance it put me in when I saw that it looked like horns were coming out of its head. I started to panic, almost in tears, just from fear, and sprint towards my friend's house. After about 2 seconds of running, it sounds like it was chasing me, but when I turned around, I didn't see it. When I turned back around, it was in front of my friend's house staring into the window, making the same laugh as before, so I am completely lost on what to do. So I run to his parents' car, because they would leave a garage door opener inside the car under the seat. I didn't really understand why they did this, but they did. As I open the garage door, I hear panting and footsteps getting closer and closer. When I go to slip under the garage door while it was still opening, something grabbed me, or it felt like it did, and I started to scream, mainly because I thought I was going to die. After about 2 seconds of this, a bright light flashed, and I saw an angel, or what looked like one, in my lot next to my house. Being me, I got up as fast as I could and hit the garage door button again. But this silhouette of what seemed to be an angel suddenly made me feel very calm. I told my friend what had happened, and I thought he would just call me a liar or only plain dumb for even thinking I saw what I did. But he told me that he had seen a lot of things that he couldn't really explain in my lot at night, and even outside his window. And when he saw them, he just wouldn't move, and he would close his eyes, and the object he was describing sounded just like what I had seen. But not even 2 hours later, we were playing in a movie, and we heard scratch behind us. We look behind us and see a silhouette, and all of a sudden I realize it's the same thing I saw outside his window, and the same thing I had seen in the lot next to my house. He instantly said, "Dude, don't move." So I trusted him while I whispered to him that this is what I saw earlier. He said, "This is the thing I've been seeing for months now." After about a minute of us not moving and this silhouette looking at us, it banged on the glass, and we started to freak out and ran into his living room, scared shitless. At this point, we had no idea what to do, but he started to cry, thinking that it was after him and me, and he was convinced we were going to die. All of a sudden, the same silhouette is in the hallway that leads to the living room. We both start screaming and yelling for his parents, and we run to the couch and hide under the blankets that were on the couches. After about a minute of us crying and freaking out, his dad walks out and asks what the fuss is about and tells us it's almost 5 a.m. We explained to him what happened, and he just said it was our imaginations. After about a month of this whole thing happening, my friend called me at roughly 2 a.m. and said he saw a lot of black things walking around my house. I instantly woke up my dad and told him that someone was outside. He went out and saw nothing, but when I went back to my room, I saw the silhouettes right outside my window. I decided to sleep in his room because I was so scared. I realized that my friend was on the phone when I told my dad. I went back to the phone, and he is screaming for his parents. He picks up the phone and says to me, "Dude, I think that they are in my house." After seconds, I hear banging on his door, and he begins to scream louder and louder. Then after about 2 minutes of banging, his parents come in and ask him if he is okay. A week later, they moved out of the house, not saying why or anything. But me and my friend are still the best buds to this. And I wouldn't stop asking him to tell me what happened till about 2 months ago when I told him that I saw the silhouettes again outside of my house. I probably should have said that we moved into his house about a month and a half after they moved because it was a bigger house and it was on the market for a good price. My dad had basically given me the house as a present about a year ago and didn't really care as long as I took diligent care of it. Anyways, after I told him that, he told me exactly what had happened and said that if it gets worse, I need to do something about it. He had told me that there were black outlines of people all around his house, and his hand and mother both knew about what was going on, but didn't want to scare him. He had told me that it felt like someone was standing on his shoulder, and something was holding his feet, almost like they were trying to drag him onto the floor. His parents then came in, and it all stopped. That is my story, guys, and to this day, I still see the silhouette of something every now and then. I don't know if it's my mind or what, but it does still scare me. And I have no idea what it is that we saw that night. And after that, I have tried everything on finding out what it is, and there is nothing out there that says anything about it. But I just wanted to share my experiences with everyone. This actually happened to be in October of this year. I frequent a gas station that is right down the road from my apartment. I became pretty close with one of the graveyard shift clerks. I don't like to sleep because of my sleep paralysis. It really is that bad. We usually talk about gaming or whatever, and we will talk for a couple of hours. He doesn't really seem to be sociable with anyone, and I'm the same way. I have terrible social anxiety. Well, I want to go get a pack of smoke and a drink. Mind you, it was about 3 o'clock in the morning and close to Halloween, so it wasn't uncommon to see people in masks. I live in a college town, so me and the clerk were shooting the stuff, and we see this guy walk in with a red bandana and a hood over his head. I caught a glimpse of something chrome in his hand, but it didn't register as a gun which he had to my head. He told the clerk and I to put our hands up and get behind the register. I was scared at this point, so I cooperated. He didn't seem interested in me at first and did the whole empty out the register scenario. Then he turned to me and told me to empty out my pockets and put everything on the floor. He took my phone, but not my wallet. After that, we locked us in the bathroom. I thought he was going to kill us and booked it. He left a trail of cigarettes, and I guess he had a getaway car because the trail of smoke just stopped and he dropped my phone. We called the police officers, but they never caught him. This is my dad's story. He was 17 and living on an isolated farm in Nebraska. One night he was home alone and kept having bad dreams. The one he remembered the most vividly was the one where he was lying in his room, and he heard footsteps approaching his door. Once they reached the door, they stopped, and then there was nothing. A few seconds later, the door slowly opened. He woke up startled, and his heart was beating incredibly fast. It was around 1 a.m. He looked around and was relieved that he was still alone in his house, in his room, and that the door was still firmly closed. As soon as he relaxed a little and was getting ready to get back to sleep, he heard a creak and looked over at the door. It began to open. He screamed bloody murder and charged it, slamming it shut. He turned on all the lights in the house and stayed downstairs until someone else came home. He said it was one of the scariest things that had ever happened to him, besides being in an abandoned building during a bombing and thinking he was going to die, obviously. When I was a first-year student in high school, one of my mom's really good friend's dad was killed crossing the street going to church. Her friend, I'll call her M, had a rough life because her first husband had died of cancer years before, and she had a rough upbringing. My mom had planned to attend the funeral and was super excited because she finally got to meet M's new fiancé B. The night before the funeral, I had a dream I was talking to my grandfather, and it was raining a ton. He told me to tell my mom hello, and for my mom to mention the plane crash to M. He was very brief, but he had brought it to my attention that I really needed to tell my mom about this. My grandfather died 2 years before I was born. I thought this was super odd, so when I woke up the day of the funeral, I caught my mom right before she was leaving and told her this story. She thought I was making things up, or it was an odd coincidence. She went to the funeral, and nothing was brought up, and everything went really well. Around a week later, my mom called me in total shock. She said that Em had just called, and her fiancé died in a private plane crash in Canada. Maybe 6 or 7 years ago, I had this dream slash hallucination slash vision slash whatever. I was sleeping, but I woke up or dreamed or whatever that an ex-girlfriend of mine was in my room. Okay, whatever. Except she's standing or hovering over me very creepily. She's not dead, but this vision of her is there above me, just staring at me. I look back at her, and she says to me, "Let go," in this creepy, ominous way. We hadn't been together in maybe 2 or 3 years, and I had no feelings towards her at all, negative or otherwise. It still creeps me out, and I still don't understand it, because it was so real, man. I haven't talked to her in years, and I sure never told her about this, but I really don't know what to make of it. It's just really creepy to think about, even to this day. Here's a little story about a kid. He's not my kid, but he's my little cousin. His name is Benjamin. His imaginary friend is actually a deceased relative. He knows things about this relative of ours that passed away by drowning in a local lake a little under a decade before he was born, give slash take a year. Things that only I and the deceased relative knew, things that only the deceased and other relatives knew, and the minute details that no one thought important to tell this toddler about. This deceased relative was one of my uncles who shares the same name as Ben, including middle and last names. For clarification, the dead Ben will be referred to as Uncle Ben, as he was in life, and the living Ben simply as Ben. Ben was named after Uncle Ben by my Uncle C, which is Uncle Ben's eldest and only brother. Uncle Ben and I were extremely close. Our age was relatively close, and we just had a lot in common. We did everything together. So, it wasn't a shock to me that when it got weird with Ben, he only wanted to be around me, and only me anytime we were in the same vicinity as each other. While I appreciated the company, all of the creepiness that came along with it was a little off-putting. He would ask me about things that, like I stated before, only Uncle Ben and I would know. And only about stuff like that, it was like Ben didn't have anything interesting to talk about that was as like every other toddler. He asked me if I still remembered where the treasure that we had buried was. I remembered what he was talking about, but not where it was. When I replied no, he grabbed my hand, led me to the little sand pit behind my great-grandmother's house, and asked me to start digging. About 3 feet down, there was the little bag of plastic gold coins, a rusty switchblade, and a gasless Zippo. He would tell me the same corny jokes, show me the same magic tricks, and talk to me about the adventures we used to have. The real eeriness, though, had actually been happening between Ben and his dad. We were over playing cards, and it was around lunchtime. Uncle C was making PB&Js, and Ben asked him if he still liked peanut butter, because you loved peanut butter when we were brothers. I still love it. Do you remember when we tried mayonnaise and peanut butter? A pin drop could have been heard. Everyone, there were around 10 of us in the large living room, just stared at the dumbfounded Uncle C, who was, in turn, staring down at Ben. Visibly shaken, he choked back the lump in his throat and gave a shaky reply of, "Yeah, I remember, buddy." There was another time when Ben was bugging Uncle C about giving him his old Rubik Cube back. That cube, along with some of the other possessions of Uncle Ben, had been in the attic at my house for nearly 10 years in some box that my grandmother had given me with the aside of, "He would have wanted you to have it." The part that was slightly more disturbing than the fact that he remembered the cube was that he knew exactly which box it was in and where it was sitting in my attic. The most recent, and by far the trappiest, event to happen thus far was last Christmas. Ben showed up with his little backpack and was telling everyone that he's got a surprise for us from Uncle Ben. No one really put much thought into it at the moment, but then he started pulling pictures out of the late 90s, pictures only my grandma had copies of. Pics depicting Uncle Ben in high school with friends and various other teenage shenanigans. Knew all of the people in those shots by name. It was a little odd. He even had pictures from Uncle Ben's funeral. You would think, maybe he just took them from Uncle C's stash of pictures? But no, that would have been impossible because my family didn't allow anyone to take any pictures at the funeral. They have this weird thing about it being rude to take pictures during a funeral. I never put much thought into it and don't really care as to what their reasoning is. No one has figured out where he got those photographs. Ben won't tell us, and there isn't anyone else who knows where they could have come from. My roommate and I were having a tough time finding a new place. Our lease on the old place was up, and we'd already stayed a month over, so we found this place that was a little run down and convinced the owner to let us move in while they were fixing things up. It was perfect. Huge house, giant rooms, garden, close to both our jobs. And since it was a bit beat up, we negotiated a lower rent. The owner had already replaced everything with brand new appliances, but hadn't finished the aesthetics yet. The floors were nasty, dirty old wallpaper. Everything was filthy, old furniture that needed to be hauled out. It was like living in a horror film. The first night, my roommate stayed at his girlfriend's place, and I stayed alone in the house. The entire night, I felt like I was being watched. I kept on getting chills all over my body. I go to bed and fall in and out of sleep all night. It's the middle of winter, but all night I feel hot and sweaty. My skin was itchy, and I felt like something was pinching me all over my body. All night long I dream about an old woman in a white nightgown staring at me. And as the night goes on, she gets closer and closer until I wake up because it feels like someone grabbed onto my ankles. The next morning, our next-door neighbors came by to introduce themselves. They've lived in their home for about 60 years and go on to tell us the history of our house. The woman who lived there previously, a distant relative of the new owner, had lived in the house almost her entire life. The house had been in the family since it was built maybe 100 years ago. The last 10 years of her life, she lived with a private nurse who evidently took horrible care of the house and apparently worse treatment of the woman. The woman died in the house, and since there was a giant bed left in my bedroom, I'm assuming she died in my room. Weird things continued to happen for the next month or so. My roommate and I would both hear the other wake up early in the morning and make lots of noise eating breakfast or cleaning. One of us would get up and realize the other was still sleeping. I'd come home all the time and find my door unlocked. It opens into the back patio. Random things would get misplaced. At night I'd hear what sounded like someone walking back and forth on the porch. Eventually the place got fixed up, and now it's a beautiful house that's completely unrecognizable. All the weird stuff stopped happening, and the mood of the home is revitalized. I like to believe that whatever was watching us now watches over us.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.